How you doing, Jack?
Oh, yeah.
I'm well. Hey, Joel. And Joseph, good to see you. I think all of you have already found the minute stock, but it's in the chat too. Is this your first meeting back, Jacques?
Yeah, for this group, yes.
Cool, good to see you again.
Howdy, folks. The segment to add your name to the notes doc. Chat. Can you all hear me now? Yeah, okay, great. So it's confusing with the screen sharing. Cool, anybody new?
I am, this is my first time joining.
I can't hear you, Aaron.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, no, that's good.
Well, this is my first time joining. Great to meet you all. I'm Aaron. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Phylum that is kind of working in the software supply chain security space.
Aaron, do you know Alan Clements?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, he stopped by Houston the other day. He's a former Sonotyper, and we had lovely dinner. And he was on his way to San Antonio for your big meetup. Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Nice to meet you, Aaron.
You as well.
Yeah.
In that case, Dustin, do you want to move on to the next item? Because I can start talking.
I think I'm back. Can y'all hear me? Can I get a thumbs?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry.
You're good.
I don't know. I can't share my screen without it like completely killing my audio for some reason. Like I can't hear anything either. So
I'll share mine. Give me a sec.
yeah, appreciate that. Sorry, Aaron, I didn't hear intro, but welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And also, yeah, thanks for all the work that Phylum has done in Python ecosystem lately. It's been awesome. Okay, should we move on? Jacques, are you ready to talk about this? Your audio has also now been nuked. I can't hear you.
Okay, that seems to be working. I take
Gotcha.
it.
Yes.
Sweet. To change from can you see my screen? Yeah. So in there, I basically link to a PR which has been opened on rubygems.org, And the gist of this PR, I believe I can load it up here, and you should still be able to see it. Do you see the PR in front of you? Cool. Is that somebody's proposing to do something very much like what Maven Central does, which is to sort of surface vulnerability information. So they have, this prototype working. What we're mostly curious about, and Joel, perhaps you'd be the best person to ask about this, is like, what issues or hiccups or things were surprising about doing that? Like, we just want to sort of know more about it to get some context on what to expect.
So you would think I'd know all about this, but that site is actually mbnrepository.com. Really has no formal relationship with Sonatype or anything that we do. I kind of know how they source their information. Their data lags by like a week. I think there's an index that they download and scrape, but then they decorate it on their own. I really have no idea like how they line up to the CVEs or anything.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
So that's the surprise for me. I will say that I don't know if we publicize this to this group, but we're looking at sort of modernizing a lot of the formal search interfaces that we build. So there's central.sonatype.dev has links to vulnerability information from another Sonatype property, OSS index. And I thought that that's what people had stumbled upon. And I can talk more about that. But that one, there's no surprises there either. It's essentially another group at Sonatype's like, this is now information we're willing to give away for free. Do you want to hook it up to Maven Central? We're like, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I nothing sort of struck me as a possibility. I see that there's some folks are throwing some notes in though, so maybe they could speak to that. It's hard for me to see who's doing what when I've got the shared screen going.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, there's like an article here about NPM audit and the way that it surfaces vulnerability information that I think a lot of people consider to be broken. And so I think that's something that I've tried to avoid in the Python ecosystem, trying to like essentially like audit every single time an install happens. On PyPI, we actually have all the vulnerability information via OSV for all everything that has a CVE or exists in an advisory database on GitHub or elsewhere. But we don't surface it in the UI, like the website UI, which, if I understand correctly, that's what the PR for Ruby Gems is about, right?
Yeah, that's what the proposal is to surface it. And I'm sort of like, I'm not sure how I feel about it. Like, at a surface level, it seems obviously good, but something in my mind is just sort of nagging at me. I can't quite put my finger on.
My thought about, like, I had recently considered thinking about adding what it would take to add this to the UI and whether it'd be useful. And I think a lot of users probably aren't coming to the web presence for these indices to interact with them. And so, like, even if you flag it there, like the chances of someone seeing it before they install it is not very high, right? So
yeah.
So my strategy has been like, let's get this, let's get audits happening in CI, like as a regular, when you run your tests, you also like audit dependencies and things for vulnerabilities and get like Dependabot and things set up everywhere. And like that should be the avenue to hear about vulnerabilities, but I don't see any reason not to though, right? Like I'm like,
yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. The only other thing is it relies on the RubySec data set, which, is curated by volunteers. I think actually that's the source data for OSV as well when it comes to Ruby, but don't quote me on that. Which is a useful data set, but it relies on folks taking time out of their day. So I guess now what it's nagging in my mind is I'm wary of people making this like their canonical source of truth or relying on this solely. I don't know. I'll have to think about it some more. But thank you all, Dustin and Meta, for the links. I'll definitely look at this.
The only thing to add is the idea of what is the sort of goal? Devs to dev is an interesting example and I'm not actually sure how Ruby does that and how it expresses its dependencies. So the devs to dev example I've linked actually is interesting because it talks about like actual vulnerabilities in the thing itself, but also its dependencies.
Right.
And so so that's sort of an interesting detail there, right? And it would be cool to chat if Ruby is actually using OSV for this, because OSV tends to provide sort of a slightly more actionable vulnerability reports to people, right? Saying which you can actually say which version is not vulnerable or which commit, assuming the data set is there. So that you know, like people can actually click through it and say like, oh, okay, maybe I need to upgrade.
Yeah, if it is using the RubySec dataset, I know this one is this proposed RFC, proposed PR rather. Well, actually, it's not a proposed PR; it's an RFC. I'm sorry, I'm very loose with my terminology. My understanding is that it's coming from the RubySec database. I'm not sure where I got that impression though.
One thing
the reason I say
OSV
that is, go ahead.
sorry, one thing that OSV does do is it also ingests GitHub, I think, advisories. And so I've just searched for like, I'll paste a link for OSV here in the chat, which has actually some of the examples from GitHub advisories, which may actually come from RubySec. I'm not sure. I need to click through that, but yeah.
Yeah. Also, Joseph notes that it's in the PR name Ruby Advisory DB. So that is, if I remember correctly, the name. The RubySec is the sort of the organization or GitHub org. I've used that data set before in some exploratory work. It's interesting what you can cross correlate. Yeah, that's basically all I needed. So I'm all done. Thanks, everyone. So I guess, oh, yes, I suppose I should let Dustin do the actual wording. Did you want to take it back now that we worked it out? Because basically the trick was you had to press the little green bar to find the mute.
No, it's just like shut all my audio off. If you don't mind to keep presenting, that'd be great.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, one last thought is, one thing we do expose for PyPI is an API that includes all this vulnerability information that I've already seen people using that and finding that useful. So I would say like, maybe not as part of this PR, but maybe, separate feature, something that should be maybe higher priority is actually exposing this via an API rather than just the repository. So it can be like directly correlated, but I don't actually know what APIs exist for Ruby gems. So maybe that doesn't make sense. Cool. Yeah, Yosef, do you want to talk about the friendly README problem?
Hello, everyone. I would like to show a quick demo to explain. That's just like my personal name of this problem. There are two parts actually. So I would like to share some tries to take over some packages we faced recently on Ruby gems, and also some countermeasures we are trying to deploy, and ask for some maybe suggestion or recommendation if any other package maintainers were facing similar stuff. So I would like to see also any recommendation how to tackle those problems. So let me share my screen first. Can you see my screen right now?
Yep.
So in Ruby gems, you can use a bundle to generate a gem skeleton, which is really used in 99% of creating new packages. So you just provide a bundle gem and some name. So it's generating some stuff for you. And as part of this generated stuff, also README generated with actually already points in the README by the gem name specified to install for the client. So then usually you do some work in progress stuff and push this to GitHub usually, which then kind of README. The problem is this gem is not pushed yet to rubygems.org. So anyone can scan the GitHub for this kind of pattern of the README and try to take a look if this gem already pushed. If not, you can push and like win the race of the naming on reserving the name on public resource. So this is relatively simple to fix on our side. So our plan currently is to stop generating this part, just make it a little more generic, right? So like name and put like big to do in here, like update These rubygems.org. This is something we can do easily on our side. So with the next release, this will be somehow fixed. But the second problem is what we faced. So usually we go, you report this to the author on the GitHub. So in this, this is actually a real case of something we got reported by some automated checks. We reach the author of the GitHub repo. The author just update the README, so it's just not suggesting anything anymore. We block the user on RubyGem side and also remove the gem from the index, so nobody can just install it. And we see this pattern being used more often and often in recent weeks. So the second part of the problem is we are trying to block the users, but the users are trying to be creative of creating new accounts, and they are using. You need to have unique email on RubyGem. So once you get blocked, that email is blocked, right? So you don't need to bring your new account with new email. And that's what I mentioned in the list as well. We would like to prevent registering those emails, and we find out some patterns. Some of those, let's say, researchers, to be nice to those, are trying to use. So for example, HackerOne is providing email, Gmail is doing the same, which is I think called on emails on Gmail side, email address variations. So you can just get your email, put a plus sign, and anything after the plus sign can be random. But on our side, it's unique email, right? So you can like create infinite amount of accounts on one Gmail inbox, thanks to this. Other service you can use is something called disposable emails. Thanks for this link. And also clearly manually you can buy domain and provide some kind of domain basket. So everything sent to some domain on the email will land somewhere. So personally, I'm aware of we can't win this fight like in 100%, but we can also try to make it as hard as possible for those not friendly users. So currently we just validate uniqueness of an email as it is. So I would like to ask for some suggestion on this. If any other package maintainers are aware of this and are doing something more complex. So for example, try to block on those disposable email. There's some nice list on the GitHub we can use to say this is not real email service, right? So please provide some proper email. Also, we can try to stop block those services using those aliasing. So we can just treat the email also not unique on Gmail, since we know Gmail works this way. Also, Hackerspace email, or sorry, HackerOne email works the same. So we can provide some additional rules to prevent those malicious users to be able to provide infinite amount of accounts manually. So those are my questions. Is any other aware of this and also doing some countermeasures on this?
I can definitely speak to all of this, but yeah, I'm curious if anyone else wants to chime in.
Yes, first, sorry, I don't know if I totally understand the problem here. So I get why like these disposable addresses where someone can re-register with the same address 10 minutes later or an hour later is bad. But like I use disposable emails all the time. I have a wildcard email at my vanity domain, and I use that for every sign up I do. Like, so what's the issue?
Yeah, so the issue is we are seeing malicious users using those, right? So we are not rushing for this to not block everything using this kind of email, or at least it seems like this one. But we are trying to find out some balanced way of not really annoy proper users and also try to stop those malicious ones to make it this easy for them to create infinite amount of accounts, because we are blocking their old account. So they need to bring new email to create new account and do some malicious stuff again.
Are they making like large like volumes of accounts? Is it like a resources thing, or is it just about the pseudonymity?
Oh, so in last 2 weeks or maybe 1 month, one like, let's again call it researcher created like 10 aliases using Gmail and HackerOne email, the same, just having the plus sign and some suffix on that side. And we just block them, right? So we just remove the malicious gem and block the email. So it's the blocking the email is doing like nothing for them, right? Since they can create simply new account using the same one, just providing different suffix.
So we have PyPI has the exact same problem. Happens a lot, maybe even more frequently. And so one thing we did a while back, I helped maintain this disposable email list, which, to be clear, like Zach, what you're describing, I wouldn't call a disposable email. The disposable emails are the ones that sort of don't require any registration or anything like that, aren't like personally owned, right? So a lot of them are like open inboxes also, so the accounts are kind of just like, so you can do a password reset and get access to it. So we prevent registration with those. That doesn't really cuts down on spam a little bit, but not really what Joseph is describing. One thing that we do, which is maybe kind of counterintuitive, is that when we find this, we don't block or shut down the account. Because what we found is that most often they will just keep using the same account. And so we just sort of like put a little flag on the account and keep an eye on it. And that allows us to sort of just maintain this sort of list of like known bad things that we can cull pretty quickly. So that's one thing. And then the other is like IP address based filtering and monitoring, because in my experience also, like they just use the same IP address. So they'll create the same account or 10 different accounts from the same IP, and it's pretty easy to correlate those. And that has pretty good signals usually. Although lately we have been seeing a lot using Tor exit nodes, which has a lot of overlap with legitimate user traffic too. So yeah, kind of have to be careful.
Gives me a
Just
thought.
one note,
Oh.
sorry, Jack. Zach, just to make it clear for those variations on email, so I mean those plus signs in the middle of the email, I was thinking about like treat without plus sign and with plus sign the email the same, right? So you can use the plus sign in the email, but only once for your domain and the prefix, right? So you can continue using it, but only once, because it will be considered it's the same inbox if you use the plus sign in the middle as without, right? So I can post some example to the chat, but definitely it's not about blocking using plus sign in the email, but just use it once per context.
Yeah, I can imagine legitimate use cases if I have like an organization that I'm a part of and I want to maintain 2 accounts, but I don't know that these outweigh, like I think they'd be rare enough that it's acceptable collateral damage for sort of. Yeah, so this is not about stopping anyone, right? Because it's pretty easy for me to just make a new Gmail account, but it's sort of inconveniencing people who are repeat offenders. Making their lives a little harder.
I was going to ask similar thing to Zach. Basically, it's not about stopping this, but slowing it down, right? Is that the correct sort of categorization, that you just want to make sure that as they're doing this, they can't do it at scale effectively, right? And if so, like things like capture and other things, would they actually have a good role to play here?
So it makes me wonder whether we can use something like shadow banning as a trick. So if they're logged in, they can see it. They can see their own hostile packages, but nobody else can download it. So it'll throw them off. It won't last forever. Eventually people will figure out this is going on, the word will spread, but at least temporarily you'd confuse some of the attackers. Does that make sense what I said, or did that just...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's pretty easy to figure out if you're shadow banned generally, like when forums and stuff do this. But again, like I don't think the attackers are so sophisticated that that probably matters. They'll probably just keep publishing there. So.
And is there anything in public we can take a look? So what's currently happening on other systems? I mean, what kind of rules are, for example, applied, if any, currently?
I think that was the list from Dustin, wasn't it? The disposable email domains was one.
Oh, that's the list of the like domains used for this one-time emails. But I mean, for example, if Python packages, is there any public like policy or something you can just take a look and go through?
Yeah, or I don't know. It's not, I'm happy to write it down and share it, but it's not a thing that we really state publicly because A, it's sort of adaptive depending on what's going on, but also B, I don't think we really want to fully expose our full strategy to combat this. Yeah, there's not really a need for it, I guess. So yeah, happy to share it with all the folks here.
Mhm. Also, our other question, but it was answered by that link, was about to keep some shared list of those disposable email domain, but it's already present, right? So um, there's a various, I find out various lists, but this one seems to be like aggregator of all other ones. So see if this is the best one to follow if I understand it well.
Yeah, this one's been maintained for a while and it gets a fair amount of contribution, and folks are pretty good about keeping it clean, and there's a lot of rules around what can and can't be in there. So it's not just like they're pretty, we're careful not to add false positives and things. So
We can clearly make it super friendly, right? And like during you are doing a new account, if we like filter out and consider this is probably a malicious one, just by doing the simple stuff, looking at the domain and stuff. We can also make note if you think this is wrongly assumed, please contact us at support, right? So we can manually take a look and remove this from our block list.
Out of curiosity, is that sort of abuse generally limited to a single package manager, or there is an opportunity for sort of like maybe through this group for a bit of cross package manager collaboration in sort of battling the abuse?
you're sort of suggesting like a shared block list of emails and domains and IP addresses. Yeah, that could be interesting.
It was actually original intention, which I missed to explain, to don't invite it on our side again from scratch, but try to reuse as much as possible. If anything is implemented on the other side, we can implement like technical on our side, but share the same approaches. So thanks for this note. That was the original idea, actually.
I wish someone from GitHub was here because I feel like they probably have fairly good abuse protections in place, and yeah, we can maybe lean on that a little bit as well.
We can also wait for the next time with some other to collect some other experience.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this? So I'll try to find time to sort of write up our general policy and share with the group.
It's kind of interesting, your noise canceling, Dustin. It's blocking out the first part of the keyboard sound, but it's not picking up the echoes from the room. So we can just hear like the sound of a distant keyboard.
Yeah, I was just looking at, so one thing I wanted to also add, so IPA, we just recently added an acceptable use policy. This is largely based on GitHub's acceptable use policy, and this is because we wanted to take some kind of specific actions to take down things that included hate speech, and we didn't really have a public policy to point to for that. So I'm not sure if other repositories have these acceptable use policies, but so far we found it helpful to sort of formalize that. I dropped a link in the notes. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Brandon, are you on the call? There he is.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think 2 weeks ago I shared the package manager survey takeaways for open for comment. It seems I got a couple comments, but nothing kind of I guess no requested modification. So I'm wondering what would be the best way forward to kind of deliver kind of like the results, maybe like create a PR in a repo. Like what would be the best way to kind of encode? the group's work. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been kind of talking about what we can use the repository for, and I think like publishing like documents in that as like a single README file might be an interesting thing to use it for, like reports from the work group or something like that, right?
I'd be happy to, like, if the group is fine with it, I can open a PR with kind of what we've written in the takeaways, as well as like also just put in a CSV of the results minus the emails and all the PII.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think, yeah, this probably also, you know, we want to use this to make a list of recommendations for things that gaps that are worth funding. So some like short list there to summarize would be probably really helpful to share with the TAC and elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Anyone else have thoughts? We're just quickly, you know, padding out the agenda as we go. All right. So one other thing I quickly want to mention, I put together, so we had OpenSSF, like organizing team or whatever, had reached out to us about their annual report. They wanted a short thing on the work group. So I sort of threw together some of our accomplishments for the year. And so this is the doc that we shared with him that just sort of like in 250 words describes what the group does and some of the things. The survey is included in there as one of the things that we did. But yeah, just want to share that with everybody. I don't know if it's finalized. If there's comments, feel free to add comments or edits if you want. If anything seems weird, but it should be straightforward, I think. Jacques, you ready to talk about? Yeah.
Yeah, this is something I just realized I hadn't put on the agenda. So we have in the past discussed the idea of having a clearinghouse repository of data where we sort of drain a bunch of different repos into the same location, and we sort of put the data into a common format, that sort of jazz, make it easy for researchers, vetted researchers to look at stuff. But also we've talked about collecting malware samples for the same reason for vetted researchers. It turns out that idea has actually been floated in a couple of places, I discovered. So the end users working group had a similar idea for collecting malware samples, which they called supply chain total, by analogy to virus total. So that's one thing I wanted to raise, and I've raised to the end users working group that this is something we've discussed in the past as well. And one I just saw yesterday or the day before, which is from identifying security threats or security tooling, I don't recall which of the two, called assimilation or simulation. I'm not sure how you want to pronounce it. It's sort of a pun on CMs and assimilation and OSS. I'll try to spell it in a minute. But essentially that one is just like, security, security, I can remember what CM stands for, something management, security and management, and an IE in the middle. And the gist of it is that they want to collect these samples and also do sort of threat intelligence on them, which I know something is that the end users group have thought about as well, is having a threat assessment capability. And to the point where Jonathan Meadows from end users even would like to see the OpenSSF having staff whose job it is to provide that threat intelligence to ecosystems. So that's the thing I wanted to bring people's attention. I don't know what's actionable just at the second, but I have made sure to let both groups know that securing software repos has thought about this in the past. So if they start to make movements, I hope that we're involved, that we can share wishes and thoughts.
Can I pick on Brandon for a second and ask also about Guac and the relationship between, because Guac seems to be doing overlapping though not identical things.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to say exactly what Guac is doing because I tend to look at it through the frame of that article I wrote about the idea of a universal asset graph and what all the things I thought it had to do. But it does, in my understanding, it is essentially, a sort of a smaller version of what I had in mind. So it is a graph that describes, assets or artifacts, and information about them. Trying to link it back to a whole bunch of things. So building a graph database that represents a whole bunch of things, including attestations about artifacts that have been collected and turned into the graph for querying purposes. I don't necessarily think it's the same. I think there's obviously overlap, and I hadn't thought of that connection before. You can imagine federating something over it. So using it as the place where you store the name of artifacts and what their hashes are and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, my understanding, and anyone who knows better than me, which is probably most of you, feel free to correct me, is that basically this is not core to Guac, but winds up being a prerequisite for a lot of it. And some of the work that's ongoing in that project roughly looks like, pulling in data using the package analysis pipeline. And it seems like basically as you're pointing out, every group in the OpenSSF has a need for this data. And so I'm saying less, I guess, that Guac should be the party that fills this role, and more that solving these problems will be beneficial to that project as well.
Yeah, as I said, I hadn't thought of that connection, so I'm going to need to digest it. I can see that definitely working for stuff like metadata about packages and so forth. There were things though that like we would want to collect which shouldn't be in a public graph. So I don't know to what degree Guac should be federatable. So there's obviously the malware samples. We don't want the baddies to teach each other through our offices. But also things like, for example, if a package gets yanked, one thing might be, I don't know who's tracking for the reasons for it at the moment. I know in RubyGems we don't, but it's like on my mental checklist somewhere about back here on the list is like, it would be cool if we could say why we yanked a gem. Was it because of a copyright claim? Was it because it was reported malicious and we agreed? Or was it, some other reason? And that information would be sensitive. We wouldn't necessarily want to advertise that particular packages had a copyright claim against them or that they were found to be malicious at certain points and that sort of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is yes, but I also have to think through. But I should also defer to you because you're the one who was sort of.
Yeah. So sorry, my vision is, I suppose, all encompassing, right? Like I want, and if it helps, and this is something that we're gonna devote serious chunks of this meeting time to do, I can try to make sure that we rope in a bunch of academics and other researchers to one of these meetings one time. I'm coming. Just yesterday I was chatting with a group at NC State, which just got a huge NSF grant to work on software supply chain security, and they're very interested in a lot of empirical questions. They've done a bunch of work with the open source insights data set that's, I think, that's the same, that's the deps.dev website that shows up in our meeting minutes a little bit above. And so I think my vision from a sort of research perspective is have a one-stop shop across ecosystems where you can get a bunch of data. And I think we're slowly working towards it. The Python ecosystem in particular, I want to call out as having done an incredible job making sort of download and upload data available and using Google BigQuery, which means that it's pretty easy to join against the open source insights data set. So we're getting there, but I think it's worth doing some amount of coordination to make sure that the schemas look similar enough that like I don't have like the end goal is I'm a researcher. I'm trying to do some metadata analyses of various package ecosystems. I shouldn't have to write one query for the Python ecosystem and one query for the JavaScript ecosystem. And so I'm relatively indifferent to how we get there. I like a push-based model like what Python's doing, but I understand that's a little bit more work and requires a little bit more cooperation to get into the repositories. And in practice, we're going to have a hybrid of push and pull. But I think trying to like, settle on schemas for these things and then having some subset of the tables that are, especially for any we're probably going to want push for anything that's deemed sensitive, right? Like, or I guess we could expose, you know, an API that's like what's been yanked and put it behind some access control. So that was a little bit rambly, but I think I'm relatively indifferent to how this gets done, but I think the vision for the end product is basically the OpenSSF, maybe using BigQuery or something like that as a repository that's sort of ground truth for metadata in formats that are relatively consistent across ecosystems. In that as a starting point for a bunch of, because I think if this data existed, all these other working groups wouldn't be trying to create it. They'd just be happy to use it. And they might have specific things they want out of it, and we should get feedback from potential end users. But that make any sense? That was a little rambling.
Well, I'll say like
certainly has a role to Dustin, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to quickly say, like, BigQuery has a public datasets program too that can help do all this. So and like host the datasets, you don't have to pay for the hosting either. And I can put whoever in touch with that if anyone wants to take on that project.
I was going to just say about Guac, right? I think Guac certainly is a data source for any threat intelligence capability one might have, right? Because presumably it will let you pivot on different points in sort of the data set, right? If you identify some sort of maliciousness, you'll be able to maybe go and jump, like come back to earlier discussion, by email or other sort of property, or based on package analysis results, for example, that get ingested, right? But it will always be sort of the interesting private component, right? Because otherwise, if all the threat intel data is publicly available, then it sort of defeats the purpose in that people, the minute it becomes actually meaningfully useful and effective, it will immediately get incorporated into the tactics, right? And people will start changing the things we publish, right? All the IOCs and whatever that might be, right? So it's an interesting, interesting tension in there.
Yeah, I think we can safely vet the data or vet who gets access to it. I think there's a road to go in terms of getting all the way to the gold-plated one that end users envisage, like a full threat full threat intelligence capability, which would be amazing. If we could, come to this and have like an unreported section where we get briefed on what's happening. But I also think that there's going to be a road before we get to the point where there's a proposal and that the governing board can vote on it, and we can spin up people and all that kind of stuff. Because even then, you've got to hire threat intelligence analysts, which is a long road in itself. Okay, so I don't have sort of like immediate actions beyond the ones I've already taken, which was to let other folks know. I don't know if anyone else wanted to propose something, or if we want to sort of put this down as a the more you know situation.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad you brought it up. I don't earnestly want to propose spinning up a new working group for this, but it almost seems like that's what we should do. Really, I think what's missing is someone with the cycles to drive it. If that were to happen, I think most of the folks in this room would be willing to help out. And there's a bunch of ways that could happen by sort of enumerating use cases and so on. So like, I don't know, I've brought it up in the past and it's something I would be excited about, but it's a little bit back burner for me. I wonder if actually, speaking about sort of the academic end of things, if we could sucker some poor grad student into their project.
Sure. I mean, it wouldn't be a bad project. It would look good on the resume, like,
yeah,
you get bragging rights for building good data sets.
Yeah, I'll poke around because there's a number of researchers, and I know more of the ones at academic institutions who are doing a lot of cool empirical work trying to analyze software dependencies and software supply chain, who might be in a position to kind of drive this. So I'll drop a line. That can be an action item. And you don't need to give it to me in the doc necessarily, but I'll drop a line to some of the folks I know and see if there's any bright-eyed and bushy-tailed PhD candidates that we can trick taking on this job.
I mean, I gotta say, I can't dedicate cycles to it. If anything, I'm having to reclaim cycles from other working groups at the moment. But I am hardly in favor of such a repository because of seeing in the past that empirical results do not always generalize from one repository to another. And my job is to worry about Ruby gems, and I want to make sure that Ruby gems is part of any study so that we get those results. So I'm in favor of having it.
Yeah, I think this would enable a lot of cool analyses that are currently done in a really ad hoc way. So like there has been research. I know there's been a lot of discussion in this group in the past on what have been termed domain resurrection attacks. So I have a vanity domain. Sorry, David Wheeler. That I use to sign up for my PyPI account, and then I don't think about it for a year, and that lapses, and someone notices there's a package with that email, and then they re-register that domain, and now they're able to impersonate my email and recover my account. And so like the extent to which that it happens across ecosystems, I think like those analyses have been done, but they're very ad hoc and they're limited to one ecosystem at a time. I think a data set like this would enable cross ecosystem comparisons of that. And in general, like let us really quickly assess the degree to which various attacks are worth worrying about. And help us do a lot of prioritization. Yeah, like there's nothing like having a SQL database you can just throw a query at, and like I've noticed a lot of these meetings. And this is the best we got right now, but are someone from one repository saying like, hey, I'm noticing this, are other folks affected? And in many cases, with a sufficient data set, we'd be able to answer those questions pretty quickly. So cool. Okay, so it sounds like everyone is in favor of it and no one's willing to put in the work. So
Standard stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone's in favor of birthdays, but nobody wants to bake.
All right, any other thoughts, comments? Any other last minute agenda items? Any action items? Brandon, what did you want to take an action item, or should someone else take an action item on the survey next steps?
I think Brandon's dropped out.
Guess he's getting an action item then. Anything else? Okay, just a quick reminder, we'll meet in 2 weeks. Zach will chair, and then we'll be canceled on the 28th for end of year, and we'll see everyone at that point in the new year. Anything else? Okay, great. Good to see y'all. Take care.